Well, I want to talk a little bit about looking like God. We have been in a series of talks here on our identity. And we can have our identity in different kinds of things. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit about your identity as a gift to this world from God. But today, I want to talk a little bit about what our identity as connected to God looks like and unpack that a little bit. Now, during my talk, you are welcome to text me your questions anytime during this. And my number, again, is 780-262-0940. And then tomorrow, I will do a Facebook Live response to any of the questions that come in. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. But I want to connect with you at that level and keep it real. So if you've got questions that's not making sense, just text me and we'll work that out, hopefully. So a few years ago, a guy named Michael Jackson, I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he was a singer and a dancer. He died, actually. Now, some of you are expecting me to do the moonwalk right now, and I'll have to confess, I don't know how to do the moonwalk. I've just never learned that. Actually, dancing, period, is not my thing. However, Michael Jackson, he did know how to dance. And he died a few years ago, and that's really when I started to get curious about him. I'm confessing to you that I'm not a pop music fanatic, obviously. And so I did a little bit of research into his life and discovered that when Michael Jackson was a child, he actually didn't have a very nice childhood. His dad was quite a tyrant, a real slave driver to all of his kids. And when you read between the lines, you can see that his dad was probably actually trying to relive or reignite his own childhood dreams through his children. And so he was trying to relive his ideal life through his children. And when you look at Michael, you at first glance look at him and see a person that sort of was exact opposite to his dad. He loved children, he was really good to children, or so he would have us believe anyway. Now there's some doubt about that. But when you stop and think about it, you realize that actually Michael Jackson was very much like his dad in the sense that Michael Jackson was trying to relive his childhood as well. And that's why he created this world around him that was all about kids. And so, even though he did it in a very different way than his dad, he really was living out the exact same thing as his dad was doing, trying to relive his life through children, or relive his childhood or childhood dreams. And the interesting thing is that this isn't unique to them. We often try to live out our lives through other people, and we can often be more similar to our parents than what we think we are. In their case, Michael, I think, probably was trying to be as different from his dad as what he could be, but in the process ended up actually living out the exact same thing in some ways as his dad. And so I'm in my 50s now, and I'm realizing more and more how similar I am to my parents. And some of that is wonderful, but some of it is kind of scary too. And I feel for my own kids, who someday will realize that they're like me, and have to live with that reality too. But then if you back up and look at it at a bigger level, we realize that we are also very similar in some ways to our Father who created us, Father God. And we have some very similar attributes as him. I want to explore this a little bit together today. So I want to start by looking in the Bible. The reason I want to look in the Bible is because this is where we find the foundation or the roots of both the Christian and the Jewish religion. And in both of those religions, we read that God created mankind. He created the whole world, actually. And so in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, this is what we read. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, the livestock and all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So just a couple of things I want to touch on before we kind of get to the meat of this. First of all, I'm not here to talk about how God created mankind. Kinds of different theories about that. That's a different discussion. But I believe that God was the creator of, and it's one of those things that you may not believe in that, but I believe in that because of science, actually. When our children were born, I started studying what happens in utero with children. And one of the things that makes those 1 million strands make that has to be God, in my opinion. That doesn't just happen by random chance. Now, the second thing I want to talk about before we get into the main issue is notice in this verse that it says that he created them male and female in his image. So we are created both men and women as the image of God. Now, in some patriarchal cultures and some patriarchal religious environments, even Christian ones, we have tried to make God more of a man than a woman, and we've sort of downgraded women. Now, God does go in the Christian tradition and Jewish tradition by a male pronoun, he or him, but that does not mean that women are not created in the image of God. Together, male and female reflect the beauty and image of God. So I just wanted to clarify that right up front, that women are not somehow secondary or distant cousins to the image of God. They are very much on par, equal in their image of God as what any man would be. Now, the other thing I just want to say is, if you have looked at the Bible, you recognize that there's two parts to it. The first 2/3 are the Old Testament. The last 1/3 is the New Testament. And if you read the whole thing, you recognize that it almost seems like there's two different gods. Like the God in the Old Testament seems very different from the God in the New Testament. So let me explain why that is. Humans have always had this propensity to want to be independent. Right now in our world, we are getting a real good taste of what it is to be an independent human, because we're being asked to isolate from people and just do it ourselves. And I quite frankly don't like it. I don't think humans actually were created to do life alone, But yet we've got this drive to prove that we are independent and can do it alone. And so, what happened was that mankind had this spiritual drive to do it ourselves as well. Now, God is a God of love, and loving people meet other people at their level. And so God met mankind at their level and said, okay, if you think you can do this on your own, have at her. Knock yourself out. Do the best you can possibly do. And so God actually stepped back from his character, which was a very difficult thing, to allow us to, as humans, to try to figure this out on our own. And that had huge negative consequences. So when God steps out of his natural character, it creates chaos. His natural character is to help, is to love. And so when he steps back from helping and says, okay, you figure it out on your own, things do not work well. Sometimes I wonder if one of the reasons why so many of us struggle in this world is because we still sometimes have that attitude towards God. We're kind of going, God, I got this, don't worry about me, and then chaos breaks out everywhere. And so, the whole first 2/3 of the Bible were basically mankind beating his head against a brick wall, trying to figure this out on our own. And that is what religion is all about. And quite frankly, the religions of this world are some of the worst things that have happened to our human culture in some ways. Some of the most heinous crimes have been committed in the name of religion, thinking that this is what pleased God. And so there was this sense in which religion just created all kinds of mess. And it just got worse and worse until Jesus came. Finally, it got to a point where Jesus became human, God became human, and he said, okay, now let me show you what God really looks like, what his heart really looks like. And so Jesus came as the embodiment of God himself, love himself, and he walked around helping people, which is what God really loves to do, what love really loves to do. And so he helped people find salvation, find healing, find restoration. And Jesus is in the business of taking chaos and bringing about good instead, bringing about order and health and making things work in our lives. So let's just look a little bit at what Jesus helped us learn. So let's go to something his very best friend wrote in 1 John chapter 1, verses 7 to 13. So it's up here on the screen behind us. There we read, "Those who are loved by God, let his love continually pour from you to one another, because God is love. Everyone who loves is fathered by God and experiences an intimate knowledge of him. The one who doesn't love has yet to know God, for God is love. The light of God's love shined within us when he sent his matchless Son into the world so that we might live through him. This is love. He loved us long before we loved him. It was his love, not ours. He proved it by sending his Son to be the pleasing sacrificial offering to take away our sins. Delightfully loved ones, if he loved us with such tremendous love, then loving one another should be our way of life. No one has ever gazed upon the fullness of God's splendor, but if we love one another, God makes his permanent home in us, and we make our permanent home in him, and his love is brought to its full expression in us. And he has given us his Spirit within us so that we can have the assurance that he lives in us and that we live in him. When we connect with God, our Father, first of all, we start to understand ourselves. When you understand the person you're like, it actually helps you understand yourself. We were created, us actually understand. It's a little bit of art. When you know the artist and they explain to you what they are trying to create through the art actually makes way more sense and is way more meaningful and way more beautiful. And this is exactly the way it is with us. God actually calls us his masterpiece. And so when we understand the artist, then the art makes way more sense, becomes more beautiful, and we begin to understand how it was created to function. Now, the second thing that happens is we become more loving, like we read here. See, God oozes love. Everywhere he goes, everything he does, everything he says is just oozing love in every direction. And so when you associate with somebody like that, you become like them. It draws that out of you. And so we come alive and we thrive as we love and become like our Father God. As this happens within us, we become all that we were created to be. The sense in which we were also meant to ooze love. And so as we hang out with God through Jesus, we also begin to do the very thing that we were created for. The other thing that this does is it helps us to give others freedom around us. That's what true love does. True love does not try to control people. It does not try to force anything on somebody. True love opens our hands and allows people to have freedom, like God has done for us. And so as we hang out with God, get to know him, we begin to be more open-handed, or our arms are opened wide. We begin to love with no strings attached. We begin to set people free to thrive as we are thriving. And it's a beautiful thing. Now, I've just mentioned 3 things. There's lots more that happens as we reach out to God. And that's what the wonder of walking with Jesus throughout your lifetime is all about, exploring all those different facets of what it means to be in the image of God and to live that out in this world. Well, Dallas, I'm in the image of God. Things that come at me in my mind, telling me to do this or do that, and I feel like I'm torn within me. A part of me wants to do the loving thing, and then there's another part of me that wants to do something not so loving sometimes. Why is that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Paul, he was a guy that wrote almost half of the New Testament, actually even more than half of it. And this is what he says in Romans chapter 7. I'm a mystery to myself, for I want to do what is right, but end up doing what is moral, what my moral instincts condemn. And if my behavior is not in line with my desire, my conscience still confirms the excellence of the law. And now I realize that it's no longer my true self doing it, but the unwelcome intruder of sin in my humanity. For I know that nothing good lives within the flesh of my fallen humanity. The longings to do what is right are within me, but the willpower is not enough to accomplish it. My lofty desires to do what is good are dashed when I do the things I want to avoid. So if my behavior contradicts my desires to do good, I must conclude that it is not my true identity doing it, but the unwelcome intruder of sin hindering me from being who I really am. Through my experience of this principle, I discover that even when I want to do good, evil is ready to sabotage me. Truly, deep within me, my true identity, I love to do what pleases God. But I discern another power operating in my humanity, waging a war against the moral principles of my conscience and bringing me into captivity as a prisoner to the law of sin. This unwelcome intruder is my humanity, what an agonizing situation I'm in. So who has the power to rescue this miserable man from the unwelcome intruder of sin and death? I give all my thanks to God, for his mighty power has finally provided a way out through our Lord Jesus, the Anointed One. So if left to myself, the flesh is aligned with the law of sin, but now my renewed mind is fixed on and submitted to God's righteous principles. So what's Paul really saying here? Well, he's basically saying that there's two things going on inside of all of us. There's the part of us that is created in the image of God, which is our true identity, and we want to go in that direction, part of us. But then there's another part of us that is stuck in a different way of thinking and is pulling us in that direction as well. And if you've ever struggled with addiction of some kind, you know exactly what I'm talking about right now. Or maybe you struggled with losing weight or trying to work out or go to the gym or something. You know exactly what I'm talking about here. Something our angel on one shoulder and even on the other shoulder. That we're in a tug of war inside of ourselves. Part of us to do and wants to do that. Another part of us is drawn in a different. Right now, facing this major crisis as a community, as a global. There are people who are following the good side and are doing things that are very beautiful and wonderful, but there are all. And I think the other day our premier said there's a special place in hell for people that are scamming people or hoarding at times like this. And so we find ourselves in a position where brings out the best in us, sometimes brings part of the dilemma beings. We have it to go. That's the truth. And God has given us the freedom to choose. And sometimes people say, well, why would God allow it? Because he loves us. See, love, freedom. If God didn't love us so much, he may control everything. We become robots and only do what he wants us to do. Because he loves us, he gives us the freedom to choose either to do the bad thing or the good thing. And this is his love for us. But unfortunately, that means some of us choose to do bad things on some occasions. Actually, honestly, we probably all choose to do bad things from time to time. None of us is perfect. And perfection isn't really an option that we can choose. Only direction is a choice. So we cannot choose perfection, but we can choose direction, either this way or that way. And the truth is, we have the choice what we do with our lives. There are a lot lesser versions of ourselves where we choose more and more of the evil side. And then there's better and better versions of where we choose more and more of and displaying that. And came to move us in the direction of display. And so what did he do? He came and he modeled it for us, showed us how to do it, but then he also sent the Holy Spirit to empower us to do it. So the truth is, we not only have a role model in Jesus, we also have somebody walking with us to help us figure out how to do it at a nuts and bolts level. And so the key thing is, he has given us a choice. So the question becomes, what will you choose? Will you choose to allow him in to help you? Or will you say, sorry, I'll figure this out on my own, thank you very much. And we know how that goes. I've normally at this point up for questions. If you have a question, please text me and let me know what it is, or even just send me a text and say, hey, I enjoyed that, or whatever, thanks for sharing. I'd love to connect with you, and then tomorrow we'll do a live stream to respond to those questions. I just want to finish up our talk here with a little story. True story. When I was 7 years old, my family and I moved to Sweden. I was born here in Edmonton, grew up down in the Lower Mainland outside of Vancouver, and then when I was 7 years old, we as a family moved to Sweden. My dad was born in Sweden, so we moved back to my ancestral home. Mom was from Canada, but he was from Sweden. Now, we lived there for the next few years. I went through a process that sociologists call forming a third culture. So what that means is that when you move into another culture, you begin to reevaluate your culture of origin. So I started to look at Swedish culture versus Canadian culture more and more as I got older, and I started to pick and choose different values. So for example, one of the Swedish values that I really grabbed a hold of was, in Sweden, nobody should stand out from the crowd. Everybody's to fit in and just stay the same as everybody else. And so I've picked up on that value. So when I'm in a crowd of people, I try to just fit in. I don't like to stand out. Here in Canada, it's okay to be your own person and dress your own way and, kind of draw attention to yourself. But Swedes don't like to do that. So I don't like to do that. But then one of the Canadians that I make them out of your potential. And so I really have tried to look at my gifts and skills and things like that and say, how can I make the most out of my life? That's a Canadian value. And the result of having a few Swedish values, Canadian values, is that I no longer really fit perfectly in Sweden or in Canada, because I'm a unique third culture that's a mix of the two. And this is what happens when we begin to follow God. That those two cultures begin to blend. The culture of the way we like to do it ourselves, and the other culture of the way we were created to live, God's way. And so we end up not really fitting in either culture. We don't fit in with the people maybe that we used to fit in with, that just, I can do it my own way, thank you very much. But we're not totally like God yet either, and so we're sort of standing in the middle somewhere in a unique position. I said it a minute ago, perfection is not a choice we have, but direction is. We can choose to move in the direction of self and helping ourselves do it on our own, or we can move in the direction of letting God help us through Jesus. The question to you this morning is, what direction are you going? Are you choosing to let God help you? This way maybe? Or are you choosing to do it on your own? Are you choosing to reflect this image of yourself or to reflect God's image that He created you to be? I don't know about you, but I'm choosing Jesus. I'm choosing to follow Him. I'm choosing to let my life be shaped by Him. I'm not there yet. I'm not where I want to be yet, but I'm moving in that direction. And I'd like to invite you to make that choice today too. Maybe you're not ready. Maybe you're feeling like, oh, just not there yet. That's fine. Just keep exploring, keep learning, keep figuring this out. But maybe you're ready today and you're saying, yeah, that's what I want. I want to be the best person I can possibly be, the person that God created me to be. And if that's you today, I invite you to just say this little prayer with me. Dear Jesus, I get it. I need your help. Please help me. I invite you into my heart. Show me the path. I'll put all my cards on the table. I make bad choices sometimes. Please forgive me for that. I want to follow you. Show me how to do that. Talk to you later. Now you have made a choice. If you prayed with me, you've chosen to move in that direction. And I'd love to hear from you. Send me a text and I'll interact with you and help you whenever, any way I can. Keep moving in that right direction. So we're going to come back and pray again, and then we'll be done. So thank you for listening for these minutes to me. I appreciate that. Worship team, let's sing.